Lord, thank you for this day, for your many blessings, for the peace and the encouragement and the new things you are doing. We ask your blessing upon this word that we would, in our hearts, that we would hear and know and think and be that much closer to you by your grace. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, well, this text is Matthew 26, 1 through 13. And there are two parts, Matthew 26, 1 through 13. There are two parts, verses 1 through 5 and verses 6 through 13. Now, what I want to do is begin with 1 through 5 and then pick it up with 6 through 13. And 1 through 5 actually has an interesting, it sets the stage, it sets the context for what is our main focus, which will be the anointing of Jesus. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." So there he is, right there, telling them a crucifixion prediction. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. So they had a meeting about Jesus. And what does it say? They conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. It doesn't say they conspired to send him to Pilate and have the Romans do it. It doesn't say they were going to go out in public and have a trial. They were, at that time, going to do it in the night. They were going to slit his throat or something. But they said, not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people. So right? So all the people were at the festival in Jerusalem. So the Jews had come from all over to come to Jerusalem to the festival. And so now they don't want to kill him during it. Why do you think? Because it might be a backlash, but which shows he was rather popular. I mean, the triumphal entry, the Palm Sunday, is a big indicator, but the fact that they weren't comfortable doing it while a bunch of Jews were in town was another big indicator of his popularity.
It sounded like, too, that he did not want, or that they did not want to be sailing into the responsibility of killing Jesus. They just wanted to get the job done.
That's where they
didn't do that.
That's where they cleverly end up, and that's where, especially in Matthew, all through Matthew, it's this back and forth. And sometimes just read Matthew from, get through the genealogy at the beginning, and then read, especially just the whole thing. It doesn't really take that long. And you'll see, watch for this escalating tension between the Jewish leaders and Jesus. They're snapping at him, and then he snaps back. They snap at him, and he snaps back. And Matthew has more of those snapback sayings, you might call them, those kind of, you vipers who do this and, get the plank out of your own eye and all that stuff. Most of that stuff's in Matthew. Matthew is the drama, as they say. So, and it slowly escalates until it's, we cannot crucify him. Our law prevents it, but you can do it for us, Pilate, And then he says, well, is he your king? Oh, well, then they don't even just not say he's the king. They say, we have no king but Caesar. Now that's, for some Jewish people to be saying that, under oppression, under Roman occupation, that's messed up. That's messed up. Anyway, I don't think God liked that part either. So, all right, start at verse 6. So that's why I wanted to tell you the tension. I just wanted everybody kind of set. So in your little movie in your head, turn it up like this is a thriller. The tension, it's a thriller. It's what's going to happen next. It's way up, okay? Dun, dun, dun. Now, while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar a very costly ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. When the disciples saw it, they were angry and said, "Why this waste? For this ointment could have been sold for a large sum and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble this woman? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. By pouring this ointment on my body, she has prepared me for my burial." Right? I mean, this is talk about foreshadowing. "Truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." Anybody doing that today?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Kind of came to be, didn't it? How about that? That's very meta. That's what the kids say. That's very meta. Meta is like something, I don't know. It just happens like on a surface level, and it happens on a deeper level too, right? Yeah. So that's self-referential. It's very self-referential, right?
Is it the word M-E-T-A, meta?
M-E-T-A, meta, like meta. It's from metaphorical, metaphysical. It's just short. It's short for something that is kind of coming on its own. Yeah, that's what Facebook named themselves, their company.
Well, Facebook, the software is called Meta.
Their parent company is Meta. So, but yeah, they took off on that. So anyway, okay. I'm gonna actually read right from a book. So if you've already read this part, just forgive me, but this is going to lead us right into our questions. So I'm on page 118. Okay. You have to spend money to make money, the executive director of the charity told me when I asked him why his organization was spending so much on their big gala. I knew he was trying to attract donors who had an excess of disposable income, but pony rides on a cruise ship, shouldn't someone say enough is enough? We shouldn't spend this kind of money as a charity. And then I throw in about presidential inaugurations. And then at the top of 19, it's likely that your church has at some point wrestled with decisions about how much to spend to maintain an organ, to repair stained glass, pay instruments for a cantata, or replace faded pyramids. At what point does the expense constitute a waste? Such questions were on the minds of the disciples in this text when this unnamed woman enters a dinner at Simon's house, broke an alabaster vase. Anybody have alabaster in their house? I can't afford it. Of expensive perfume, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Poured it over Jesus' head. They said, "Why this waste?" And they said what really makes sense, that, I mean, this is hard to get around. This perfume could have been sold for a lot of money and the money given to the poor. We're going to talk about, okay, were they right? Well, what did Jesus have to say about that? Okay. Then he says, "Why do you make trouble for the woman? She's done a good thing for me. By pouring this perfume over my body, she's prepared me to be buried." There it is. Okay. A battle between two competing goods. Neither thing was bad. It was a competition between which one's better. The perfume was a finite resource that could go to serve the poor to be used to worship Jesus. To the disciples, these were mutually exclusive options. It wasn't going to be like pour out half the perfume and sell the other half, and there's no compromise here. Who was in the right, the woman or the disciples? Okay, don't answer that yet. Now I'm going to kind of give the disciples their voice here. We know that Jesus, so I'm continuing in 119. We know that Jesus answered that question, and we know what his answer was. But if it's at all possible, try to suspend that knowledge for a moment. I know that's hard. But just consider the disciples' position so you can understand Jesus' point. Jesus criticized the disciples in this case, but not for their concern for the poor. After all, so he doesn't say, what are you talking about? He does say, you've got me but he doesn't directly outright tell them they're wrong for asking that question. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't say something like, well, how dare you ask that question? He has an explanation. But anyway, after all, they had already heard Jesus tell a young man, now I'm on 120, to go sell what you own, give the money to the poor. In the chapter right before this, that was in Matthew, in the chapter right before this chapter, he says, when you have done, he has this parable, when you have done it for the least of my brothers and sisters of mine, you have done it for me. Then there were the numerous times Jesus confronted the lures of wealth in his teaching, and there's so many I couldn't put I can't put them in the book. So the disciples were just applying Jesus' teaching as they understood it. I mean, until this passage and Jesus has come back, can you understand where I'm coming from? I'm like, well, they're just going off what they know and what they've seen and what he's been teaching them. But they were angry. Theirs was a righteous anger. In the accounts of this story in the Gospels of Mark and John, one or more, and this is interesting too, see the same story in Mark and John, in those accounts, one or more of the disciples remarked that the perfume could have been sold for almost a year's pay. That's not in the Matthew one, but that's in the other ones. A year's pay. And then I put, what is it they say about an engagement ring? 2 months' salary? A year's pay. Let that sink in. She brought in something that and once it was poured, was it collected again? It was gone and gone for good.
Gosh, did it get in his eyes or, I mean, you know.
What?
Did it get in his eyes or drip down into his food? Or, you know, I mean, a year's worth, it seemed like it'd have been a lot.
It would be, well, but no, it was not, so it was not the 100 pounds of perfume that Nicodemus brought. That's a lot of perfume, okay? And that might have been perfume that doesn't cost a year's salary, although it was probably very expensive. But she brought a jar that she carried herself, so it couldn't have been like a vat that she rolled in. You know what I'm saying?
A jar like that, you pour it on your head, where's it going?
So on his skin, it'll be absorbed into his clothing and into his skin eventually. But yes, and she probably didn't go down his face, but you know, lean back or something like that, goes down your hair.
Well, more than likely he was reclining.
Could be reclined, because at a table they were already reclining.
That's what the Romans.
They would be like this, right? So she could have been pouring it this way, you know, sideways.
He had hair that would show it.
Hair. They were always talking about, you know, the oil. They were always talking, unlike me. They were always talking about the oil that were, you know, in the Old Testament, the oils would run down and into Aaron's beard and this kind of thing. So they had beards and all that stuff. You just try it at home. Just get some olive oil and try it. See what you get. You bearded guys. So they are, but okay, but that's what I'm saying. It was a year's worth, not because it was a huge amount, but because it was so rare. It was so valuable. You see what I mean?
Like a bottle of Chanel number 5.
Oh, it's more than that. Yeah.
More than that.
Oh, dude. Like, this is stuff you couldn't. This, like, if it was today, it's stuff like I don't think you could even get it on Amazon. It'd be like, I don't know, imported.
She got it from Amazon. Didn't tell us, but I was wondering where she got it.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I think it probably came from, you know, a family treasury of some kind.
It says here that it's a flowering plant in the honeysuckle family which grows in the Himalayas of Nepal, China, and India. So it would have had to have been brought, and that would have been more expensive. Only the rich people could have afforded this.
Well, are you looking up alabaster?
I'm looking at nard.
Oh, nard. Okay. Yep. Some of the translations do say nard, and that is, yes, it's extremely expensive. Some of them are a little unsure if it was specifically nard, or so they just say a very costly ointment, right? Anyway, but like I said, Mark and John, they throw in like and maybe Mark and John are more specific with the nard and all too. But yes, exactly. It's the stuff that you ain't getting this at Walmart. I'm telling you. Okay, middle of the page. And how did this look to the poor? Don't forget, the disciples aren't the only ones that see this. This extravagant act wasn't in the lavish courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas, in which our text began. It was at the home of Simon, who was a leper. Did anybody stop for a second and go like, hey, what? Jesus is in a leper's house. Eating in a leper's house.
Side by side.
Huh? Yeah, and the disciples, yeah, he brought them in. They were, so anyway, just layers and layers of stuff here that we can so easily pass by, which have made him ritualistically unclean for him to be there. Such a condition likely took him out of work and Simon in the work and participation in local economy, where the disciples speaking for Simon. Look, you're in this man's house. That wasn't Simon's perfume. She brought it from outside. How does this look to Simon? We don't know for sure. Matthew records no words from Simon or the anonymous woman, but that didn't stop the disciples from trying to speak on behalf of the poor. They had decided, rightly or wrongly, that this woman couldn't afford to make such a gift to Jesus. Now, that's also kind of presumptuous on them too, right?
It's interesting how she crashed the party too.
She did. A woman came into the room, and also she's never gives a speaking part. She's never named Simon's name, but she's not named. And still today, those with means have been known to take it upon themselves to decide how the poor should spend their meager resources. You ever come across that? Well, don't give it to them. They're gonna, what they'll do with it. So let's see what Jesus had to say. But first I want to ask you, First I want to ask you, how much is too much for the church to spend on something to use to glorify God?
And who should decide?
And who should decide?
Just enough to accomplish the mission?
Don't you?
Well,
Okay, but what if, yeah?
I should have asked that the other way. It's tough in this way.
Sometimes, well, in other words, we understand, part of us really, really understands where the disciples are coming from and says, you shouldn't spend more on this than you need to. But what if, I don't want a church to get shafted by, somebody that's charging, don't pay somebody 3 times too much just because, but what if it's something like to enhance the worship space, or to do the video ministry, or to, something.
Repair all the stained glass windows.
What is the repercussion if you don't do that?
With the soundboard.
Or the soundboard,
We
or
generations lived
Yeah.
in that church without
without
amplified
sound.
sound.
Yeah, yeah,
But,
yeah. And so,
I appreciate
you're
it.
right, no, I agree. It's entirely,
Well, I think
it's a question of value of goods and that kind of thing.
I think we weigh that when we're making a decision. How much money we've got, what is it
Right.
earmarked for, what are the current needs, how will people perceive this as if it's extravagant, or if there's things that we're ignoring in the community, the needs that are not being met. And then again, people really don't argue too much if somebody endows or gives a gift specifically for that.
Yeah.
At the churches I've been in, a lot of the enhancements in the sanctuary and so on have been donated by groups or through other fundraisers, or by just raising money themselves
Yeah.
beyond the budget, so-called
Yeah.
budget.
And what if you have and that's one of the things trustees has to do is, it's very hypothetical, but what if you have somebody that gives an endowment, and it's only, the proceeds of which can only be used to supply paper clips for the office.
We need to go, I've talked to that person before they got started.
That's where, this one actually says the trustees have the right to decision, make the decision whether to receive gifts or not. It doesn't say receive every gift just because it was given. And some people give gifts with strings attached. And sometimes the trustees, I mean, this has not happened around here lately, but, you know, it's in there because it's happened somewhere. It's in the, I'm disciplined because it's happened to some church. And they would say, you know, I'll give the money if you'll make sure the pastor gets moved, because I don't like this pastor. Oh, yeah. Well,
Really?
Oh, I can,
That one seems to hit home.
To me, that would be the reason to turn out down that,
Well,
because, I mean, it's like, you know.
and so you go into the trustees, you know, and do they or don't they, you know, and how bad do they need the money? I mean, I'm just saying, it's an extreme example, but.
I think this example is, I lost it. Jesus is saying that you will have the poor with you
Yeah, that's
always.
Yeah.
And he was just saying from the future, there's always going to be people that we're going to have to take care of.
Yes. And we're gonna have to work through that because some people really misuse that.
Oh, I know.
So we'll talk about it.
But Jesus is saying, I didn't really leave.
Yeah, he just predicted it.
He just predicted it, but in our comparison of taking care of our facility, we think of that as God's house.
Right,
God doesn't live there, but that's God's house.
right.
And so we have an obligation to make it as nice as we can, but balancing our mission against the facility.
So that's what the next part is. That's a great lead in. Y'all wanna, good job, Diane. Thank you. Do y'all wanna keep going here? Okay, because you got the question, you got the quandary. Worship, 121. Jesus was upset at how the disciples rushed to judge the woman with the alabaster vase. He scolded the disciples. Why do you make trouble for the woman? She's done a good thing for me. Now, he didn't scold them about the poor, their concern for the poor. He scolded them about how they were treating her. She's done a good thing for me. Now, this might add some depth to our understanding of Jesus' self-understanding, because he was humble, he was meek and mild, and he ultimately suffered on the cross. But at the same time,
He was God.
he knew who he was. So keep that in mind, okay? Jesus recognized that the woman was what? Worshiping him. It's a bit of a Martha and Mary situation here, right? In fact, this one gets confused with all the Mary sat at his feet, and then the other woman, or the same woman, or whoever that washed her feet with her tears, and these get all confused in a lot of people's minds. But she was literally pouring her worship upon him. She saw the ethical obligation of the disciples, that is the need for the poor, as secondary to her worship. And that's a challenge, because what do you have to, and just think, it's hypothetical, but what do you think is most important for us to do if we had to choose one? Missions or worship? And that's where we're going, yeah. No, you're fine. You're doing fine. I hope you got that. He's keeping a tally of how many times she's jumped ahead. That's great. Can you make a score on the screen? Like, can you superimpose like little Diane's heads that pop up every time she, ding!
Right.
I need to go try it today.
Well, that might be her
Stay
mission.
out of the conversation.
You're not gonna get yourself anymore, get yourself anymore.
That's Diane's mission. Maybe that's her way of worshiping.
It is. It is. It's our way of worshiping. There you go.
Look at that.
Okay. So, okay. Now, second paragraph. Remember when the legal expert asked Jesus, "What is the greatest commandment?" Jesus replied that love of God is the first and greatest commandment. The second is to love your neighbor as yourself. And he said the two go together, but he said one is first. Jesus, who is God's gift to the poor, is more valuable than even a vase of expensive perfume. He is God's answer to a needy world. Thomas Long writes, all acts of Christian ministry grow out of this one profound act of Jesus' ministry. Just as the unnamed woman poured out her perfume on Jesus, so did Jesus pour out his life for her, for the disciples, and for all of us. I like how Sam Wells paraphrases Jesus' reaction. Don't you see? She's behaving just like me. She's demonstrating the exaggerance of human love. She's poured out her whole self, financial, social, and emotional, to gain your attention by a gesture of sheer beauty. I'm demonstrating the extravagance of divine love. I'm pouring out my whole self, physical, spiritual, metaphysical, to gain your attention by a gesture of sheer beauty, that is the crucifixion and the resurrection. I am the extravagance of God. And if you're taking no notice of her, then how much worse that you're taking no notice of me. So that's where, when he says, how does he put it? It's a different, he says, she has performed a good service for me by pouring this ointment on my body supreme for healing. So that's added a new dimension. She is exemplifying his ethics and she is foreshadowing his suffering and crucifixion.
And she seems to get the crucifixion for the disciples.
She does. She seems to know this, and that she chose something, and that at least he said, is for his burial. Did she know that it was about his burial? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe she did. But by the time he comments on it, he said, for my burial. He's linking it up in a way. Yeah. So that Wells quote is really helpful.
On behalf of the lady that's doing it, I think one of the interesting is we don't know her name,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really matter, but it was her way. She obviously had some money to be able to afford this, and she chose, I mean, what would you do if you knew Jesus were in the room? He would be profoundly, people would lay down and worship him, and they would bring him treasures probably that they had, because that would be the justifiable person or being to give it to, but the best that you got. Because it probably means that we need to give our best to whatever we do for him too,
Yeah.
also. And I think that's where a lot of
Give
people.
all that you got and follow me.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I assume she wasn't as
She-
wealthy, maybe not.
She was
gave everything.
certainly giving her possessions in there.
Yeah, but we can then you have to bring that down some notches from the perspective of her with money, that a poor person, like the lady that puts a small pence,
The two.
that's powerful also.
That's
So
her
we've got to
pouring
be
out.
cautious about how we look at this,
Right.
wealth versus
That's her pouring out.
non-wealth.
And that's where offering to God, and which we just throw under the term stewardship, and that's all fine. But it's a form of worship. You're giving this part of your worship. It's not keeping the lights on and stuff. That's to enable. It's to keep the lights on to enable discipling and Bible study and things we're doing like this.
I think it's important that he mentions beauty twice. The power of beauty
Yeah.
is inherent in this tableau.
It is.
And that's that's important for us to remember, because when this spiritual part of a person aspires to be and relates to that, that's all.
Exactly. Now, we need to take on this important clarification on 122. 122, first full paragraph. Jesus' remark, read it with me out loud. You have always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me. So people sometimes use that to defend apathy toward the poor. Christians wrongly assume that Jesus might be saying, don't feel too bad about the poor, there'll always be some poor people. But that's not what he's saying. That's not his intent. You have to look up in network, only look it up now, but you need to know he was echoing Deuteronomy 15:11, in which God said to Israel, poor persons will never disappear from the earth. Now, what else did God say, right? Usually, Jesus kind of pulled it out of context. See, the Jews around him knew the context, but we've forgotten the context. He said, that's why I'm giving you this command. You must open your hand generously to your fellow Israelites, to the needy among you, and to the poor who live with you in your land. Doesn't that change the whole meaning of you will always have the poor with you? It's not an excuse. It's a command. He's saying, you better get yourselves ready. You better get your charity together and get on with this, because these people are not going away. And this problem is poverty is not going away. So work on it. I mean, that's 180 degrees from what people usually say. Oh, I don't want to help them. The poor, Jesus said the poor will always be with us. So just drive on by. The poor will be present to be served by Jesus' disciples, and that's in us. Jesus would not always be present in bodily form. So anyway. There's a neat example here about a pastor, a friend of mine, that who recalled inviting the poor people to the parlor of the church, where even the children weren't allowed in the parlor, and the fancy china was not to be touched. It was only for the women's tea. Sorry, ladies, the men didn't have tea, and so it was only for that. And she worked with them, and they eventually decided to hold full-out fancy teas with the poor who were coming to their church asking for handouts. They fed them tea and crumpets, or whatever you want to call it, with the fine china. And it was the most gospel thing you've ever seen. It was the most extraordinary thing. And that changed the lives of the people who came and the lives of the people who were serving. And it even blurred the distinction between guest and host. It was like some of the poor people were helping serve and pour the tea. Ray's got a few minutes, but you have to get ready.
I'm going to scoot. I'm going to go drive the hospital car.
We are grateful for you doing that. And if somebody could, Ray has been so faithful to take care of the coffee before and after the time, but so we got it. We got it.
Thank you, folks.
Yeah,
It's
we
always
love
a
you.
pleasure.
Give our love to Linda.
Yeah, give her a hug.
Hugs from everybody.
Hugs to
Yes,
you and
the reason
Linda,
I'm
from everybody, etc.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Take care, Ray. Thank you for your great work. So,
Thank you.
so what worship practice? Here's just the question in bold. What worship practices are for you a pouring out of your best for Jesus? And it could be in corporate church worship, or it could be personal worship. Don't hem yourself in here.
Well, just being there in the first place. Okay?
Just being there in the first place, getting up and
Well,
getting
that's right.
going.
Faithfully being there.
There it is. I laugh only because it's funny because it's true. And that's there's a lot of other things that are very attractive to be doing on that beautiful day. So it's on a Sunday morning.
Well, the singing.
So there's the worship of the singing, the music. We've already talked about the offering. That's a clear one. What are other things? They come, I'll give you a hint. Most of them come after the sermon.
The fellowship with people.
Yeah.
Ascending forth.
Sending forth, right? Going out. You're pouring yourself out in prayer when we pray together. When someone's baptized, Lord's Supper, I was going to say, right, when someone's baptized, we have communion. That's pouring out in worship. Yeah. When we sing. Yeah. When we sing, all that kind of stuff. So
When we do something that's outside of the box.
absolutely. You gotta stretch, right? Right. Oh, that doesn't count. That was an answer to the
This
question.
is what she's taken out of my mouth before I get to say it.
Oh, she took it from your.
She's reading my mind.
I have a feeling there's a lot that goes on between you two. I think y'all are starting to share a brain or something.
Pity her.
You guys, that's funny. The other day, Lee was out in the car waiting for Diane to come out from the finance office, but I had something to tell Diane, and so I hollered up the stairwell from my office, or from downstairs, and I said, I got to tell you, and I said something like, what was it I had to tell you? I got these papers for you, or I'm leaving a paper for you, or
You
something.
just called my name out.
But first I went, Diane, and there was no answer. And then I went, she was up in Laura's office working.
The door shut.
The door shut. But the thing's open on top, so I knew she could hear me. So I said, Diane, and she went, I'm busy.
You didn't know this.
She didn't tell you about this. So I came out. Then I went, well, it's Pastor Taylor, and I just wanted to leave you these papers. She went, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were Lee. Sounds about right, doesn't it, Lee? Sounds about right.
You're not supposed to tell everything you know.
Well, it happened in public. It was not confidential. There was even video cameras around in the church office. And it's going to be televised. Diane, you're precious.
You're precious, so precious.
You're so precious.
So was that gold ring?
Yeah. Diane was great. That was great. I had a huge laugh. Not at your expense, but at calls of you. That's right. I love you. Okay. I'm going to skip over to page 125.
What happened to smells?
Well, you can read them. You can read about it.
I've read it, it's great, it's really great.
It is good. It
Knock on that.
is good. Yeah, but I'm gonna jump us into the resolution of this thing here. These tensions we're talking about, or somewhat of a resolution. Honestly, everything in the Bible doesn't have to be resolved in your own mind. Like, it's okay to have, the term cognitive dissonance. They say the sign of an intelligent person, so you guys, score yourself on this, is still thinking about Lee's feeling sorry for these young people. But the sign of an intelligent person is somebody who can hold two competing or thoughts in their mind at the same time and live with that. See that and leave a tension between things.
To see the paradox in this.
Paradox, yeah. To see that is helpful and rich. And so we know what Jesus said. We got the answer. Now we understand it better than we would if we didn't get the Deuteronomy context, which, next time you hear somebody throw that one, I say, there's actually comes from Deuteronomy, and then it says this. Anyway. So we're gonna talk about the tension between them, but don't feel like you have to resolve it essentially. Okay. All right. We can honor the generous woman of this text by following her example. She put the worship of Jesus before all else. So obviously, I'm picking Jesus' side on this one. Something to know that seeming to know that he was near the end of his earthly life, she prepared him for burial while he was still alive. Notice how the women in Matthew's crucifixion account did not go to anoint Jesus' body after burial. It had already been anointed. So, just a nerd. If you want to geek out on gospel parallels, right, Sarah? Sarah's got that book somewhere. Don't you have gospel parallels?
Yeah.
And you remember who wrote it? Throckmorton. Wasn't that? So she went to some seminary. Said divinity school, we would say, everybody get out your Throckmortons, and we'd all go through and look at the comparisons.
I've had to pack up my books because they wouldn't let me keep my bookcase in the hallway.
Oh.
And I have no place for it. I know.
Well, they're in boxes, you can get to them now.
They're in the storage room.
Oh.
There's about 4 or 5 boxes of books.
So often we Christians divide our ministry into 2 categories, worship and service. Sometimes we are praying, other times we are serving. Some of us prefer to go to worship, others prefer to go on a mission work site. But these are false categories. Worship is a form of service. Service is a form of worship. Right? It's the Martha and Mary paradox too, isn't it? God takes no delight in words not matched with deeds. And I could point to you some heavy verses on that one. Don't give me your tearing your clothing, rend your hearts, not your clothing, right? Neither is God looking for mere volunteers for community improvement projects. God calls disciples who worship and serve. These are not mutually exclusive. Might we consider referring to these two as worship/service? I know we talk about, by which I do not mean a service of worship, but rather could we blur the distinction between the two such that we can hardly distinguish one from the other? And you know what? Maybe that term service, worship service, is not that bad off. I mean, maybe we need to rediscover what we're talking about, that we're still using the word service as not the program or the agenda or the bulletin. It's the act of the people doing an act of service by worshiping God.
We see it in the worship service.
Yeah.
Because when I grew up, the minister was the only one in charge of the service.
Yeah.
We now have a liturgist, we have soundboard, we have video,
Right.
we have ushers,
Prayer concerns are
acolytes,
listed up. Right.
and they're serving
Right. Absolutely.
in worship,
It-
helping us to worship. And they're
Absolutely.
serving.
In the United Methodist Church and other denominations have had gradually had more lay participation, and that's been a really good thing. We'll look at the last part here. I'm encouraged by the practices I've seen in some Christian communities in recent years to hold service and worship together and to intentionally blur the lines between them. At the very least, for example, a congregation's work teams can pray together at their mission sites, so you can have worship at a service. Their hosts or partners in mission can be welcome to join the worship if they wish. Or when the church collects food or clothing for other such goods, those items can be displayed on the altar table or the communion rail for a Sunday, reminding us of our acts of service as we worship. See that? Connecting? We've done that a few times. And there's a lot of things, that communion table is an altar table. And it's for communion, but it's also altar in the sense of the altar of sacrifice. And that's why the plates, if there's not communion on already, the plates of offering are put on the table of offering sacrifice. It goes back to the temple worship, to the altar where they sacrifice the animals. Okay? So when we come in and have a funeral or something like that, there are times people ask, well, can we put this on the table? And I'm so glad they ask it. Can I put this on the table? Can I put a picture of, so-and-so on the table? And there's a little explanation that goes on to say, well, that table represents sacrifice. So we're not sacrificing the flowers or the person, who's pictured and all. Let me get a flower stand for the flowers. Let me get a an easel for the picture. Let me get this or that. But you know, the thing that don't mind one bit putting on the on the altar table, the offering, or anything that isn't offering, like this. So if you have groceries and collecting goods, I'd say you could stack them where on the side if you want to. But there's nothing theologically wrong. In fact, it's very appropriate to put them on the altar table as part of the giving. You know, it's just something to think about. In one church I know, the congregation worships in a large, beautiful downtown sanctuary, but they needed to sit closer to one another and to the front to strengthen congregational singing and further the bonds of fellowship. What did they do with the empty pews in the back? They turned them into mission pews. And that's actually the last church I pastored. It's not just a church I know. And it took us a year to get everybody, almost everybody, on board with roping off the back pews, because people love to sit in the back. But we did. We roped off, and eventually it wasn't just done in the night. It was all talked about and discussed on. But we roped off the back third of the sanctuary and moved people forward. And I'll tell you, the congregational singing was on fire, as the kids say. But also, they had these empty pews, so they were thinking, yeah, what impression does this give visitors when they walk in? And it's like, here, look how big this place used to, look how many people used to come here, is that what it says? They decided, we'll turn those into collection spots. So they started using them to collect the gathered offerings of the physical things for whatever Sunday it was they were collecting things. So you see, that became, and then they carry those forward during the service. These are just examples of how worship and service can be intertwined, but the greatest example of Jesus, the object of our worship and hope for the world. How is Jesus the example of bringing together worship and service, worship and mission, or worship and helping others?
Because his death was service.
His whole death was service.
So he has a cross on him.
His life was service, right? Exactly.
But we have the cross, they ultimately have a cross.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's a capital crucifixion.
Defines
I mean, it's in and of itself, it's a bad thing.
Right.
To die on the cross, but it became the focus of our Christian experience.
Of our worship, yeah. That to worship Jesus as the Lamb that was slain, as the Bible, as Revelation later said that. Servant King. Servant King, yeah. And it's because he was the King, because he was the one who deserves all our, and is the one who deserves all our worship, he made his sacrifice was all that much more efficacious. I mean, it was meaningful to us. And because he went through it and was obedient to the suffering and crucifixion, then only then, are we, Paul would say, is only then are we saved because of his obedience. Because it's not just faith in Christ, it's Jesus' faith, his own personal, real, human/divine faith.
I guess you could say he was worshiping God.
He was worshiping, yes, yes. He was the object of worship and the example to us of worship.
The thing that I've struggled with for years, most recently, probably the last 5 or 6 years, is I see more and more people wearing crosses. And that doesn't bother me. And what I have to pull myself back from is judging them for wearing the cross. Because some of these people, it makes me cry to think that they're using this book and the cross to further their agendas. And I mean, but I can't judge them for that, because that's, you know what I'm saying? It's a horrible balance for me to try to wrap my head around that. I have no right to judge them if they're wearing a cross, but at the same time, the things that are coming out of their mouth makes me cry because I feel that they're not telling the whole story.
Yeah. And they may not be committing atrocities, but there have been atrocities committed on the cross. You know, the shields of the Holy Roman Empire had a cross in the front with a sword, you know, and to kill the Muslims.
Crusade.
Yeah.
That's right.
Holocaust.
The Holocaust. So there does come a point when we do start, you know, when it is upon us to say, don't do that in the name of my Jesus, or something like that. You know. But yeah, I know what you mean. In parlance, there's a tension there, and people, invoke Jesus to serve their agenda sometimes, rather than focusing their agenda on what Jesus will do.
But I think what I remember, or I try to remember, is not to assume why they're learning. Because sometimes when a person is just beginning to think about Jesus, they may wear a cross and they wear it wrong.
Oh, yeah, I know.
It may, yeah.
But in their heart, it's a first step.
That's right.
That's
So
right.
you can't know that.
Or it might be,
That's
it might be a step they might not even be. It might have just been because it was a fashion thing.
It was a fashion, but it
and
still
they-
has an impact.
Yeah, but it could have, just like what John Wesley believed, like don't keep people from the communion table, even if they don't believe. It could be a thing that converts them. So
The scripture, judge not,
yeah,
do not be judged.
yeah.
That always comes back to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I try not to judge, but I'm
So
looking
you're
at
not,
that. To me, they're not, that what they're doing, when they say that they're gonna do things, or plan to do things, the things that they're planning to do don't reflect my interpretation of the cross. And so I have to struggle with that, because like Pam said, it may not, I have to respect that they may be
Yeah.
coming from a different direction. I mean, I'm only a little
Well,
mind here, I can't perceive all of this.
And all of us are subject to that too, because there are faithful, good, God-fearing, Bible-reading people who believe that some other Christians are, because they don't agree on some things, ought not to call themselves Christians, because they don't meet a certain level of, a threshold that they're looking for, or an agenda they're looking for. So it runs, it's a two-way street, and but that's exceptionally important. One thing that's so important is that we don't forget that the cross, what it really means, and that's what I think this is about too, is that someone has said, if people is the equivalent of if we were to walk around today with little necklaces of electric chairs or lethal injection tables on our necklace, because to the Romans, to the Jews, anybody that lived in that time, that was not a sweet, loving symbol. In the early days, that was a symbol of like death threat. So, but it takes the power of Jesus to transform it into a sign of hope, and the empty cross is a sign of resurrection. Okay, so next time we finish with the last, and we come back next week, we come back with the last reading, and thanks you guys for helping with the coffee and all that stuff, and let's close with a word of prayer and singing forward. Thank you, God, for this time together and these words that mean so much to us and speak to our hearts. Help us to experience the scriptures afresh and anew. Let them challenge us, and let ourselves be challenged. And let us also recommit ourselves to worshiping you, Jesus, with all of our best and everything we have. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Good.